This episode of Trifles is brought to you by listeners like you, who support us on Patreon and Substack. To learn more, go to patreon.com/trifles or trifles.substack.com.
Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the band was speckled and there were 6 Napoleons, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? Have you ever stopped to wonder about why Dr. Watson was called James by his wife? Or of Sherlock Holmes' dining habits? Or what happened when he let a criminal escape?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 393, The Geography of the Hound of the Baskervilles. Hello and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we get into the details in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And boy, oh boy, Burt, how'd you do in geography in school?
I could never find the class, you know. I went up, in my school we had these stairways, okay?
Yeah.
And I knew it was like 701, but the building only had 3 floors, so I couldn't understand how the rooms could get up to 7. So I went up the stairway, and you turn right by the water pipe, and I don't know. I mean, it's not that I didn't try.
Wait, clearly you needed a map.
Yes.
Got a map to get to geography class.
You know, but one of the things that happened on the way to geography was...
Oh, boy, here we go.
That one of the maintenance folks gave me a mop, and I really enjoyed cleaning up the gym. I'd say that was a lot of fun.
You could have missed your calling. What can we say?
You know, everyone says that.
Yes.
Every place I've ever worked, people have suggested I go somewhere else and do something else.
Oh, well, we're going to go right to this episode. This is one of our travel series. If you recall, this is something we're doing in Season 8 here, a monthly travel-based episode where we maybe look at a piece of old Sherlockian scholarship or just pick out a piece of geography ourselves and look a little closer at it. And in this case, we have the help of Kelvin Jones from the Sherlock Holmes Journal, Volume 7, Number 3. His piece is appropriately titled The Geography of the Hound of the Baskervilles. So we'll be looking specifically at that locale on Dartmoor. If you'd like to support the show, you can do that by going to our website, SherlockHolmesPodcast.com, or by clicking the links in the show notes. That'll get you to Patreon or Substack, whichever you happen to prefer. Our supporters get episodes without ads. They get bonus content when we have extra information to share with you. I have a feeling that in the last episode about anxiety, we probably should have cut that off about halfway through and given the other half to our paying supporters, but, well, we were out of our minds. What can I say? And they also, every single supporter is eligible to win every month a back issue of the Baker Street Journal. All you have to do is support us at any level. Your name automatically goes into a drawing, and we pick one out at random every month, and then we send you a back issue of the BSJ. You can certainly get in touch with us as well at trifles@ihearofsherlock.com. We always love to hear from you, and we encourage your ideas for future episodes of the show. Okay, Burt, we're heading off to Dartmoor. This seems entirely appropriate since in our 2 episodes ago we did maps and floor plans, and we talked about Holmes having a big ordnance map of Dartmoor laid out on his knee when Watson came back to Baker Street. So let's turn over to Kelvin Jones's piece here and see what we can see.
This is a great idea because it's this kind of study that really gives you, the reader, a feel for the locale. You know, it's one thing to read the story, but since we frequently discussed on this show and elsewhere how the geography, the scene, Dartmoor itself, the moor, is very much a character in The Hound of the Baskervilles. And so this is almost the ability to look at a biography of this particular character, Dartmoor. And so it all starts, you know, with the ordnance survey sheet for this part of Devonshire, which, among other things, proves beyond any doubt, not that you would have any doubt, that the place names from The Hound of the Baskervilles are actually associated with Dartmoor.
Yeah, and that to me is just one of the genius moves of Conan Doyle's creativity. Yes, he was a master storyteller. Yes, he could craft these mysteries. But when he set them in actual locations, like on Baker Street in London, which didn't extend that far in his time, or on Dartmoor out in the countryside, you know, the modern day readers, or readers of his day, I should say, were familiar with these places. And, well, he was as well, which it added to the realism of the setting, and it added to the realism of the characters, that they were partaking in these adventures in lands and streets and houses that are among us, which really, really brings them to light. So, Kelvin Jones here says, we must then, like Holmes, seek the Ordnance Survey map and see the area for ourselves. You know, he sent down to Stanford's for the map for that portion of the moor, and he looked for Baskerville Hall, right? And he says 14 miles away from Grimpen, or he could mean Baskerville Hall, as the wording is slightly ambiguous, the great convict prison of Princetown. This could cover a wide range of places. And he also says we learn that within a radius of 5 miles of the hall, there are 4 buildings: Merripit House, Laughter Hall, Foulmire, and High Tor. and then he brings in another scholar, Michael Harrison. We've talked about Michael Harrison in previous episodes here on Trifles. Michael Harrison says Merripit Hill is really meant to be Merivale, as there are quarries there. However, Merripit Hill actually exists, and this is the actual name that Watson himself uses. I think it's more probable that this is the true location of Merripit House.
Well, that's very reasonable, I think. And then next, you know, in this location, we have Laughter Hall. Now, that's not Laughtr, that's Lafter, Laughter Hall, where old Franklin lived. And it's not marked as such on the map. But here, perhaps, we have to make allowances for Watson's discretion. Laughter Hall actually lies about 5 miles east of Princetown and to the south of Merripit Hill. And there, Kelvin finds Laughter Hole, Laughtr, which sounds almost exactly like Laughter Hall, and that this is actually the site of Franklin's house is shown by the information on Dartmoor place names, which Jones was able to acquire. A book on Dartmoor that he found notes that hole is an Anglo-Saxon word meaning a valley, and that Laughter or Larter Hole is sometimes changed to Larter Hall. So that gets you to Laughter Hall and Franklin's house.
And, you know, that's just amazing when we can take these actual instances and see, you know, the etymology, the slight changes that Watson or perhaps his literary agent made that, you know, give us, again, this just enough degree of plausibility or deniability or plausible deniability to distance itself from the actual location. And then he says the rather fictitious sounding name of Foulmire is not to be found on our map, but High Tor sounds very close to Haytor. And the farmhouse that Watson refers to was probably Haytor Vale, Haytor, Haytor Vale. Watson also mentions later in his report for October 13th that Franklin lived 4 miles to the south of us. So that means we have the following information. 1, Baskerville Hall must lie in a 5-mile radius of Merripit House, High Tor, and Foulmire. All but the latter can be found on the map. Number 2, the hall must lie 4 miles in a northerly direction from Laughter Hall. And 3, it must also lie about 14 miles from Princetown. Right. So right here we have a wonderful problem that is almost mathematical in nature. It's perhaps it's rather than geographical, perhaps it is geometrical. Right, because we're looking at it, we're at kind of triangulating where Baskerville Hall is. And this is where our episode on maps and floor plans comes into play, because there were instances where Conan Doyle or Watson actually sketched something out in the text, and we could visualize it. And that's exactly what Kelvin is describing here.
Yeah, and I can't resist, pointing out the ingenuity and the delight around some of these names, particularly Foulmire. I mean, can you imagine, a newly married husband comes home to his wife and says, "Dear, I have found the most lovely cottage for us. It's just going to be beautiful. And it has a grand name. They call it Foulmire."
Oh, sounds lovely.
Sounds lovely, yeah.
Yes.
And amazingly, we can get it for a very attractive price. No one else seems interested.
We'll be planting lavender all around the estate.
Yes. It's right to the left of the tar pits. You can't miss it. Yeah. Well, anyway, as you say, if you get out, as Kelvin does, his pencil, ruler, and compasses, you can make sense of all this. Baskerville Hall in a 5-mile radius. The hall lies 4 miles in northerly direction from Laughter Hall, 14 miles from Princeton. Well, and the first discovery is that there's a hamlet called Hedge Barton near Whitcomb-in-the-Moor, and it's exactly 5 miles from both Merripit Hill and Laughter Hall. And there is a little vagueness in the case about whether Holmes meant 5 miles from Grimpen or 5 miles from Baskerville Hall, but at any rate, Hedge Barton must surely be the hamlet of Grimpen, because if you draw a 4-mile radius from Laughter Hall northwards, it passes exactly through Wooder Manor, which is a few miles from Hedge Barton. However, Wooder Manor is only 10 miles from Princeton, so it's probable that Holmes was only thinking of the approximate distance when he spoke of it as being 14 miles, because we have to accept that. There isn't any other place that fits the references to distance. Now, there's one little anomaly which can't be resolved if we take Wooder Manor as being the site of Baskerville Hall. If, as will be shown, Selden the convict was hiding near Chinkwell Tor, then it could not have been the western window through which he had stared so intently. And then there's the journey to Baskerville Hall, which Watson tells us about, which can be matched with places along the road to Wooder Manor. There's a narrow granite bridge, and, that's one, it could be one of many. But the bridge was probably at Ponsworthy, although that's not, precisely aligned with Watson's suggestions.
Ponsworthy, is that where Ponsonby Brit was from?
No, that's where they invented pince-nez.
Of course.
Of course. Yeah.
But go ahead.
And so then we're into Baskerville Hall and its association with Wooder Manor. And of course, Watson asks Holmes when he's studying the map if Baskerville Hall has a wood around it, and Holmes says yes. So there's clearly a wood around Baskerville Hall, and unsurprisingly, Wooder Manor has a wood around it. And there's a long path which leads from the manor out to the moor, and that does look a lot like a yew alley. That yew alley which saw the poor demise of Sir Charles.
Me alley?
Yeah, you, alley.
What? Me alley?
You, alley-oop. Yeah.
Alley-oop. Yeah. And third, he said there's a clue which leads him to believe that Wooder Manor must be Baskerville Hall. In Chapter 7, Watson tells us that, quote, Sir Henry has numerous papers to examine after breakfast, so that the time was propitious for my excursion. It was a pleasant walk of 4 miles along the edge of the moor, leading me at last to a small gray hamlet in which 2 larger buildings, which proved to be in the inn and the house of Dr. Mortimer, stood high above the rest. So Jones says, okay, a walk of 4 miles. Now, if Watson took the road north of Wooder Manor, turning to the right on the footpath when he came to Iseford, this would be a distance of 2 miles. However, we may infer from the words my excursion and pleasant walk that Watson was in no hurry to reach his destination. He was taking a leisurely stroll. And if this is so, he need not have taken the former route, which is the shortest and therefore most obvious one, but instead could have gone south, past Widdicombe in the moor, and then just past Northway until he reached a crossroads. And then he could continue northwards until he came to 2 roads. He would then take a left-hand fork up the East Lodge. He would then turn into Hedge Barton itself. This would be a journey of exactly 4 miles.
And that is the point in the case where Watson tells us he was walking back along the gray, lonely road that Stapleton met him and asked him to go to Merripit House. So they turn off onto a moor path, which was to lead them to Merripit House. And they would continue along that path. And just before it finishes at the main road, there are quarries on the side of this footpath. These lie on the side of a hill. And Watson gives us an identical description of this part of their route. Watson says, a steep, boulder-sprinkled hill lay upon the right, which had in bygone days been cut into a granite quarry. And there are from here many footpaths that lead from the main road to Merripit House. And, you could devote some time to trying to figure out which ones fit the description, but they clearly walked along one of them that lies south of Grimm's Pound. Because Watson, by the way, with his usual delicacy, changed the name to Grimpen Mire. So there is a Grimm's Pound there. And Michael Harrison, this is among the things that Michael Harrison discovered before Kelvin Jones wrote this particular article. This is definitive because Stapleton refers to the mire as this great plain to the north here. And this also makes it necessary that Baskerville Hall must lie south of Grimm's Pound. And so that is more support for the idea that Wooder Manor is the original site of Baskerville Hall.
Well, so as to Merripit Hall itself, Jones says there's definitive proof that a house did exist there at one time. Pilgrims will be disappointed if they expect to see it there now, but there's no doubt as to its original existence. First, there's a footpath that leads from the road to the top of Merripit Hill, which indicates that a building of some kind once existed there. And second, there are definitive references to some old tenements on Merripit Hill in the documents of the 18th century, which list 35 tenements from Dartmoor Forest. And remember, Watson describes Merripit House as a bleak moorland house, once the farm of some old grazier in the old prosperous days. And that would seem to fit that evidence that Jones cites there. And he says there's one final point which proves yet again the identity of Merripit House. When Holmes, Watson, and Lestrade crouch behind these rocks upon the right to screen themselves from the house 200 yards away, Holmes is no doubt referring to the rocks of the Hut Circle, which also lies at only a few hundred yards distance from the top of Merripit Hill. So, and that's, to me, that's one of the wonderful things about, traveling to Dartmoor. I haven't been myself, but I know a number of Sherlockians who have. David Markham actually just chronicled his latest pilgrimage out there and posing among these ruins, these Stone Age ruins. You think about Stonehenge, you think about those stone huts that Holmes was part of, and they were all these literal stone remnants of tribes in days gone by.
Well, we can turn our attention to another noted location in the case of Hound of the Baskervilles. It's where Laura Lyons, the daughter of old Franklin, lived. And we're told that she lives in Coombe Tracy. Now, there is a Bovey Tracy, which lies at some distance east of Hedge Barton. But there are a couple of reasons why this is probably not Coombe Tracy. And one of them is the 2 hours journey. We're given this number, this 2 hours journey, and it is more likely to apply to the distance between Tavistock and Hedge Barton. And so Jones's nominee for the location of Coombe Tracy is Tavistock, particularly because Hedge Barton and Bovey Tracy, the distance is just all wrong. Also, Watson came down by the Southern Railway, and thus it's much more likely that, when they sent the boy Cartwright to London, they sent him on the railway they came down by, as they were obviously more familiar with the Southern than the Western Railway. And the Western Railway passes through Bovey Tracy. So there you are. And then we're on to the skull that Dr. Mortimer has discovered in a Neolithic grave that he's been excavating. And the area around Grimspound has several possible locations for that could be the original of the long down barrow. Could be broad barrow or single barrow or two barrows. And they're all not more than a 3 miles walk from Grimpen. But, it could be probably single barrow that Dr. Mortimer made his archaeological discovery, largely because, in that area, was found a quantity of burnt bone under a flat stone covered by the barrow. And that happened at 2 barrows, but also at single barrow. So there you are. And now we're back to Foulmire.
There was a barrow where they found a giant circular stone. They called it wheelbarrow. I don't know if you know that one.
Yeah, there was just one of them. Yeah.
But I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go right ahead.
No, not at all. And then we're back to Foulmire. My favorite name. So where Watson, Watson tells us the date. On October 17th, he's walking back from the Grimpen Mire. He was overtaken by Dr. Mortimer driving in his dog cart over a rough moorland track which led from the outlying farmhouse of Foulmire. And Holmes mentions Foulmire as being within a radius of 5 miles of Grimpen. Well, and the only real location for this, the only building that Jones could find that could actually map to the farmhouse at Foulmire is Blackerton Manor. There's a rough track leading from the manor to the road at Widdicombe-in-the-Moor, and this could be the place mentioned in the quotation that we're interested in. And that means that if Watson was returning from Blacktor, he would return along the road to arrive at Baskerville Hall, and Blackerton Manor is about 2 miles from Baskerville Hall and thus lies within a 5-mile radius of it. So there you are.
There you go. And the actual spot where, according to the legend of the Hound of the Baskervilles, that the wicked Sir Hugo met his terrible death was a mile or two from Baskerville Hall, and Watson's excursion to the spot in the presence of Stapleton and Henry Baskerville was a trip of, quote, some miles. Now, looking in the vicinity of Wooder Manor, we find the curiously named Hound Tor as the shortest walking distance of approximately 2.5 miles from the manor. The name Hound Tor itself is the most convincing piece of the evidence, which suggests that this is the actual location of the place. However, in Watson's description of the place, he says that 2 great stones lay in a short valley between rugged tors. The actual spot could then lie between Hound Tor and Greater Rocks. But the 2 great stones mentioned in Watson's description, although they're found in profusion all over Dartmoor, aren't mentioned by the standard reference books in this actual area. The only stone of any great size that lies in the vicinity of Hound Tor is the famous Bowerman's Nose. That's nothing to sneeze at.
Ha! Choo! Whatever happened to Bowerman's ear?
I don't know.
Bowerman's toe.
I'll keep an eye out for it.
Wouldn't it be funny if if all of this was just a huge typo and it wasn't Tor at all, it was supposed to be toe? Hound's toe.
Hound toe. The man on the toe.
Hound toe. So now we're looking at this great location that's the last major important location in the case of the Hound of the Baskervilles, perhaps. And it's the place where Watson finds the mysterious stranger who is hiding out on the moor. Watson leaves old Franklin's house and tells us a haze lay low upon the farthest skyline, out of which jutted the fantastic shapes of Belliver and Vixen Tor. Now, Vixen Tor does exist, but it can't be the one Watson saw because it's miles away from Laughter Hall. It can be found near Merivale, which is east of Princetown. And there is no Belliver Tor, anyway, that's in the right in the proximity. There does exist a Belliver Tor, which is near Laughter Hall, but it isn't possible. Watson could have seen the 2 tors lying at a short distance from one another. But that's not really as important as the actual stone hut, because, that is where Holmes stayed on Black Tor and the surrounding area that Selden inhabited. And there are many references and clues that would help us locate their place. And so Kelvin Jones comes to the conclusion it's the western side of the manor as being that part of the moor inhabited by Holmes. And we have a little scrap of dialogue between Watson and Sir Henry just before Sir Henry chases after Selden. And that tells us that Cleft Tor is no more than a mile or 2 all.
Hardly that. Yes, so now Cleft Tor can't be found anywhere in the vicinity of Wooder Manor. And Jones says, I think this is another bit of Watsonian misdirection. Both Chinkwell Tor and Bell Tor lie at 2 miles distance from the manor, so one of these must, I think, be Cleft Tor. And there's numerous references to Black Tor, upon which Holmes stood that night, outlined as black as an ebony statue, of course, against the moon there. However, it's difficult to locate it, and it might be Honeybag Tor, or Chinkwell Tor, or Bell Tor. But Chinkwell Tor is the only Tor that has a hut circle near it. So, this then is the place that the pilgrim must visit if he wishes to see for himself the primitive stone hut where Watson sat in the dark recess of the hut and waited with somber patience for the coming of its tenant.
Poor Watson, poor Kelvin Jones, writing, back in the 1960s about all this. Today, it's so much easier now that all you need to do is drive to the Foul Mire Starbucks and pass the Chinkwell Tor Kentucky Fried Chicken.
And when you're there, make sure you ask for a trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
Above all, avoid the moor, when, as the old parchment quaintly put it, the powers of evil are exalted.